How do you do? Mr. Mentel feels it would be a little unkind to present the following production without just a word of friendly warning. We are about to unfold the Mentelhaus Frankenstein Special, a production to honor the classic film and cinematic icon based on the work of Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley. I think it will thrill you. It may shock you. It might even make you laugh. So if any of you feel you do not care to subject your nerves to such a strain, now is your chance to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Mentelhaus. I am your host, JP, and thank you for joining me on this Halloween special. We're going to be looking at the classic Universal horror film Frankenstein, but first, a brief history. Frankenstein comes from a time before NBC Comcast owned the movie studio that regularly reminds us of what's really important.
Family.
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 Family. Family. Family.
Yes, family. Carl Laemmle founded Universal Studios in 1912 with the vision to create films that made audiences laugh, cry, and sit at the edge of their seats. In 1928, as a 21st birthday present to his son, Carl Laemmle Jr. was made head of the studio. Carl Jr. invested heavily in the studio, bringing their technology and facilities up to date. In 1931, he produced two iconic book adaptations that would go on to shape the identity of the studio for years to come. Horror didn't become a film genre until 1934. That means for about 9 years, people just thought of Nosferatu as German. Over the next decade, the studio would go on to expand their line of monsters with films like The Mummy, The Wolfman, Creature from the Black Lagoon, and The Invisible Man. The Universal monsters would all share an alternate universe where the monsters would cross paths, 19th century and 1930s technology and styles were mixed, and Abbott and Costello kept getting away. Without any further delay, let's get to the movie that was banned in 1930s Kansas because it exhibited cruelty and debased morals. We open with a word of caution because again, horror films wouldn't be recognized as a genre for another few years. Boris Karloff remained unnamed in the opening credits, which I'm sure was to create an extra layer of mystery. However, it may not have made a difference to contemporary audiences because Karloff was a relatively unknown actor at the time. So much so, he wasn't invited to the studio's December premiere. Our story begins here in the graveyard with Dr. Henry Frankenstein, portrayed by Colin Clive, and his assistant Fritz, played by Dwight Frye, who Universal Monster fans may also recognize as Renfield in Dracula. We meet them as they're on a spree collecting fresh bodies for their experiment. That may have sounded odd, but yes, I said Henry Frankenstein and not Victor, as in the novel or countless adaptations. The studio at the time found the name Victor to be too severe and unfriendly, and thought audiences would have a difficult time connecting with him. Here we see Dr. Waldman at the university, demonstrating the difference between a normal brain and the abnormal brain of a criminal. Fritz sneaks in after class to steal the normal brain for the Sorry, he steals the abnormal brain for the experiment. At the lab, Henry and Fritz examine their work and prepare for their experiment. Meanwhile at home, Dr. Henry Frankenstein's lovely fiancée, Elizabeth, is word sick about him. Luckily, her good friend Victor is close by. Yes, very close by. Like a good friend. Just being a very good friend. Concerned for Henry, Elizabeth and Victor go to the university to ask what they know of Frankenstein's work. Dr. Waldman informs the two how the university condemned Frankenstein's early work, so he's been on his own ever since. Elizabeth, Victor, and Dr. Waldman head up to the castle to see what Henry has been working on. When they arrive, they receive a scientist's welcome.
Who is it? Who is it? What do you want? You must leave me alone now.
Henry embraces Elizabeth and tells her just how happy he is to see her.
Oh, can't you see I mustn't be disturbed? You'll ruin everything.
It isn't until Victor questions Henry's sanity that they are then invited to witness the experiment.
You quite sure you want to come in? Very well.
Henry shares his hypothesis.
I'm going to turn that ray on that body and endow it with life.
Boasts of the body he built, and then begins his experiment.
It's alive. Oh, it's alive. It's alive. It's alive. It's alive.
After Elizabeth and Victor witness Henry's experiment, they go to his father, Baron Frankenstein, who is displeased to hear Henry's experiments are keeping him from being home and marrying Elizabeth. Believing there to be another woman involved, the Baron insists on visiting Henry's lab. At the lab, Henry basks in the success of his experiment, when Dr. Waldman tells Frankenstein the brain he put into the body is the abnormal brain of a criminal, which he should have seen because...
Abby someone. Abby normal.
Just at this revelation is when we meet the monster himself. Jack P. Pierce designed this iconic monster makeup, and Universal Studios owns the copyright on it until 2026. It took 4 hours to apply every day and weighed 48 pounds. The thick-soled hot asphalt shoes alone were 13 pounds each. Fritz discovers the monster's fear of fire and just can't stop torturing him. Henry tells him to leave the creature alone, but Fritz has some serious issues. It doesn't take long before the monster does what monsters do.
Fritz!
With Fritz gone, the doctors work together to subdue the monster. And Victor arrives just in time to be a very good friend and help with the heavy lifting. By the time Elizabeth and Baron arrive, Henry collapses, too exhausted to continue. He worries for his work, but Dr. Waldman promises to preserve Frankenstein's records and painlessly end the monster's life. The monster wakes up during the procedure and painfully ends the doctor's life. The monster, finally free of his tormentors, escapes into the world. At home, Henry realizes he may have gotten a little ahead of himself with the whole remote castle, grave robbing, creating life from scraps of the dead thing. Elizabeth reassures him the monster business is in his past, and it's going to be smooth sailing from here. In the countryside, little Maria's father has a brief chore to tend to, but when he gets back, they'll be heading over to the Frankenstein wedding in town. Maria meets the monster and they play near the water. In the novel, Maria is drowning when they meet, and the monster saves her life. Universal needed their monster to be a monster, so...
No, you're hurting me! No!
At the wedding, Baron adds some irony to the story with a toast to his son.
Here's a jolly good health to young Frankenstein.
Before the wedding, Elizabeth tells Henry she has a terrible feeling that something is coming to keep them apart. Henry comforts her and tells her there's nothing to fear. At that moment, Victor interrupts to notify them Dr. Waldman was found murdered in the lab, and the monster has been spotted near the village. Henry takes off to inspect some sounds he's heard in the house, while the monster sneaks in through Elizabeth's window and terrifies her unconscious. Henry and the house guests arrive just as the monster sneaks away. Maria's father carries her lifeless body through the streets of the town to the authorities. And of course, this is a monster movie after all, so an angry mob with torches and pitchforks band together and search the countryside for the child-murdering fiend. Dr. Frankenstein joins the hunt and vows there cannot be a wedding until the creature is destroyed. Before Henry joins the town in searching for the monster, he turns to his very good friend, Victor, and tells him exactly what he's wanted to hear all along.
You stay here and look after Elizabeth. I leave her in your care. Whatever happens, you understand? In your care.
During the search, Henry comes face to face with his creation and they battle. The monster wins, obviously, then retreats to the windmill with Henry in his arms. The townspeople give chase and trap the two in the windmill. The doctor wakes up and finds he is captive to his creation and desperately tries to escape. There is a final epic struggle, stories off the ground, that ends with the monster flinging Henry over the railing. The angry mob sees Dr. Frankenstein off to safety and burns the windmill to the ground with the monster inside. Later, at home, Baron confirms Henry is well, but will need some time to recover. As he bids another toast,
Here's to a son, to the house of Frankenstein.
and the closing credits, which of course acknowledges the entire cast, including Boris Karloff, the man himself. The man, the monster man himself, Boris Karloff. And that's Frankenstein, a classic cautionary tale on the ethics of man playing God. We've seen this theme in another iconic Universal franchise.
Yeah, but your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should.
What exactly do they mean when they suggest man shouldn't play God? They're obviously not suggesting for people to not explore their full potential and create. That would be uninspiring. Instead, I believe the message to take away from stories like these is to stay humble.
Because I'm a stud. I'm ballsy. I don't take no shit from anyone.
When Dr. Frankenstein or any of the scientists on Jurassic Park set out on their scientific expeditions to create life, they both assumed, because they had assembled the pieces, more or less, that they were in control of the puzzle. We should all be able to accept that we don't always know everything, or maybe we're not always in control. Frankenstein was my introduction to the Universal monster films, and it truly captivated me. I love how the pacing of these films allows for the audience to become submerged in a world that seems familiar and mundane, but is actually far stranger than expected. We follow these woefully unequipped characters as they deal with the trials and tribulations of their own lives. Then before they know their left from their right, they're fighting for their lives against monsters from beyond the grave. The scenes depicting physical violence are out of line from what we've come to expect of violence from modern horror, and that made me realize, much like comic books, the exciting parts aren't always in the calamity of violence, but sometimes in the quiet tense moments, or even the unspoken parts of dialogue. There's a lot of heart and humor in these films, though the laughs aren't always intentional, but I find that just adds to the charm and makes them that much more endearing. I love Boris Karloff as the monster. I've always felt bad for him and thought of him more as a misunderstood Great Lubbock, rather than an undead Hulk out for blood, and I think that's the film's intent. All of the setup would have you believe the monster is an evil maniac, primed for a rampage, but his actions show us he's just a guy that isn't playing with a full deck, just trying to get by. How is he supposed to know Maria couldn't swim? She lives right next to the lake! A few years ago, I ordered the Frankenstein Legacy Collection off of eBay. It was originally released around the time Van Helsing was entering theaters, and I honestly wasn't expecting these films to be as fun as they are. Earlier this year, I picked up the board game Horrified, which actually reignited my interest in these films, and since then, I've completed my Universal Monsters Legacy Collection, and that means I have a lot more videos to do. Thank you for watching, and before we part, I would like to encourage you to check out the Universal Monsters on your own. The films are available digitally and on Blu-ray. Please be sure to like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.